My name is Sam Vaknin and I'm a columnist in Brussels Morning. Today we are going to discuss who else but Elon Musk. When an individual or a collective are hell-bent on self-destruction, there is nothing you can do but stand back and wait to pick up the pieces, if any, are left. The way he did in Twitter, the apparently sadistic narcissist Elon Musk is plunging the federal administration in the United States headlong into a civil war. But there might be a more sinister motive behind the recent developments. Musk deployed ostentatious, brutal force and threats in order to gain unmitigated access to the OPM, Office of Personnel Management, the GSA, the General Services Administration, and the BFS, the Bureau of Fiscal Service, among others. These are the agencies that handle all incoming and outgoing payments for the federal bureaucracy. Musk wants access to the federal payment system because he intends to convert X, erstwhile Twitter, into a payment system. He has already signed up Visa. Such ingress to federal data will grant him irreversible advantages against competing banks and payment services like PayPal. Some suggest that Musk wishes to coerce the entire government to use X as its payment platform. But I think that a far likelier scenario is that Musk plans to copy the data from the Treasury's computers, and that will allow him, alone among all his competitors, to tailor his financial products to minutely profiled target audiences. The databases of the government contain all the relevant personal details and financial transactions of both individuals and corporations, including Musk's business adversaries. You do the math. And of course, Musk is only a part of the slow-motion civil war that is unfolding in the United States. I'm going to read to you something I've written well over 20 years ago. I know it would sound unbelievable, and that is, I furnish you with a link in the description of this video. You can click on the link. It leads to the Wayback Machine. The Wayback Machine captured an image of the article dated 2006. That's the earliest version available. But I've written the article in 2002, a few months after 9/11. And the article attempts to describe the next 25 years in American history and captures, I think, very surprisingly, some of the main events that have happened, that have actually happened. And in this sense, it's a bit prophetic. Just let me read it to you, and you make up your mind. This time around, so I'm reading from the article that I've written in 2002, and the article pretends to be an excerpt from a textbook, from a history textbook. Okay? So this time around, between 1980 and 2020, nationalism copulated with militant religiosity to produce particularly nasty offspring in Muslim terrorism, Christian fundamentalist American thuggish unilateralism, Hindu supremacy, the Jewish messianism. Scholars such as Huntington spoke of a clash of civilizations. Ironically, the much heralded conflict took place not between the United States and its enemies without, but within the United States, in a second and devastating civil war. So just to remind you, this is an article that I published in 2002, and it was a fake or feigned excerpt from a history textbook allegedly published in 2027. So here goes the excerpt from this textbook yet to be written. Americans long mistook the institutional stability of their political system, guaranteed by the Constitution, for a national consensus. They actually believed that the former guarantees the latter, that institutional firmness and durability are the national consensus. The reverse, as we know, is true. It takes a national consensus to yield stable institutions. No social structure, no matter how venerable and how veteran, can resist the winds of change in public sentiment. As opposed to the First Civil War between 1860 and 1865, the Second Civil War that erupted in 2021 and was fought well into 2026, the Second Civil War was fought within communities and across state boundaries. It was not territorial and classic, but total and guerrilla-like. It cut across the country's geography and pitted one ideological camp against another. It may be too soon to objectively analyze and evaluate this gargantuan conflict. It was preceded by a decade of violent demonstrations, homegrown urban terrorism, and numerous skirmishes involving the National Guard and, even in violation of the Constitution, the armed forces. Some historians cast the whole period as a battle of the religious versus the secular. It clearly was not. By 2021, most Americans profess to being deeply religious in one manner or fashion. No one seriously disputed the importance of the church, but many insisted on its separation from the state. Hence, the protracted and heated confrontation between pro-life and pro-choice advocates when Wade versus Roe was overturned by a politicized and weakened Supreme Court in 2007. Hence the drawn-out and violent debates about the teaching of evolution theory in schools or the use of embryonic stem cells in medical research. Remember, this was written in 2002. Nor was the Civil War fought between isolationists and interventionists. An ever more brazen brand of post-September 11 global terrorism and a growing dependence on international trade inexorably drove most Americans to accept their new role as an empire. They actually learned to enjoy it both emotionally and economically. And thus, even erstwhile Jacksonian isolationists reluctantly acquiesced in their country's foreign exploits. But they insisted on blatant unilateralism, the projection of American might merely and only to protect American interests. They abhorred the missionary ideology of the neoconservatives and the liberals alike, the progressives. Spreading values such as democracy should better be left to NGOs and charities, they thundered. The Civil War was not about the preservation of East Coast liberalism, as some self-serving scholars would have it. America was never less racist and homophobic than in the years immediately preceding the conflagration. The debate again revolved around institutions. Should changing mores be enshrined in legislation and case law? Should the national ethos itself be rewritten? Should the very definition and quiddity of being an American, white, male, and straight, be revisited? Neo-Marxist chroniclers attribute the causes of the Second Civil War to the growing disparities of wealth between the haves and have-nots. Presidents Bush and Cheney surely reversed L.B. Johnson's Great Society. They and their successors erased the numerous entitlements and aid programs that many of the economically disenfranchised came to depend upon and to regard as a birthright and as a cornerstone of the social contract. Turning the clock back on affirmative action and food stamps, for instance, indeed provoked widespread violence. But such outbursts can hardly be construed to have been the precursors of the gigantic flame that consumed the United States a few years hence. And finally, the Civil War was not about free trade beneficial to the service and manufacturing-based economies of some states. It was not about free trade versus protectionism, which was helpful to the agricultural belts and bowels of the hinterland and to the recovering Gulf Coast. America's economy was far too dependent on the outside world to reverse course. Its national debt was being financed by Asians. Its products were being sold all over. Its commodities and foods were coming from Africa and Latin America. The USA was in hock to a globalized and merciless economy. Protectionism was a campaign posturing, not a cogent and coherent trade policy. So what were the roots and the causes of the Second Civil War? None of the above in isolation, and all of the above in confluence. For decades, the citizenry's trust in a packed and rigged Supreme Court has declined. Politicians came to be regarded as a detached and heartless plutocracy. Americans felt orphaned, cheated, and robbed. The national consensus, the implicit agreement that together is better than alone, has thus evaporated. The outcome was the shots and explosions that rocked the United States and the world in tow on January 20th, 2021. A chilling prediction written in 2002, getting the dates almost completely correct, and definitely the events that may well lead to a civil war, a second one. And Elon Musk is playing a pivotal role in this inexorable historical trend.